So Will Hall, MA and PhD candidate at the Maastricht University, is a therapist and community development worker, changing the social response to madness, a schizophrenia diagnosis survivor, and long-term organizer with the psychiatric survivor movement. He is host of Madness Radio, co-founder of Freedom Centre, co-founder of Portland Hearing Voices, and co-founder of Hearing Voices Network USA, and past coordinator of the Icarus Project. Will has appeared in several documentary films, including Crazy Wise, Healing Voices, and Coming Off of Psych Drugs, A Meeting of Minds. And his media appearances include the New York Times, Newsweek, Radio New Zealand, Radio Sarajevo, and The Guardian. Will has a certificate in open dialogue and a diploma in process work, and his disability advocacy received the Judy Chamberlain Advocacy Award and the Stavros Centre for Independent Living Disability Rights Award. He is author of Outside Mental Health Voices and Visions of Madness and the Harm Reduction Guide to Coming Off Psychiatric Drugs, translated into 14 languages. He recently co-created Mad Camp, a summer camp for survivors, and we have got some links that we will be providing for further information regarding that. So it's a really big welcome to Will. Thank you ever so much, Will, and I will hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow, I'm kind of exhausted listening to that bio. I've been kind of busy, and I guess that's what happens when you get drafted into a movement. It was not my intention to get into mental health or be involved with the MAD movement, the survivor movement, but something kind of pulled me into it. Psychiatry grabbed me and pulled me into it, and so here I am. So I'm really, really honored to be here. I want to thank you, Joe, for inviting me, and Amber for your work, both of you. And I want to thank all of you. It's especially meaningful to me to be working together with you on this topic. And I really want to thank you for your courage and your willingness and your openness, because to me, that's 50% of the purpose of this training is just to get people to feel more open to talk about suicidal feelings and to break the taboo. And I just really applaud you, Joe and Amber, and all the work that you're doing to get us out of a medical model framework, because really the medical model at its heart, I believe, is based in fear. And that's fundamentally why we categorize people. That's why we put people into boxes. That's why we keep people at a diagnostic distance. And so all of you are really helping to break that fear by being part of this workshop and this training to me today. It's always an honor and a really pleasure for me to be doing training work with people and meet people around the world and to learn together around these topics. But there's something very specifically important about the topic of suicidal feelings that I feel is especially meaningful to me. So I want to thank all of you here for coming, and I want to thank all the different roles that we represent. For example, I know that it's not talked about very much, but most of us, maybe all of us, have been touched by someone who has ended their lives and is not with us. And I really want to honor you all for being here, having that connection with someone who did pass, and also to honor the memory of the people that have passed. And I also want to recognize, I have lost people very close to me, family members. And so I'm grateful for all of the survivors of people who have passed, who are here with us today. And also, I want to say this is something that I really hope that the training either helps you learn about or confirms what you already know, that suicidal feelings are way more common than we recognize. They're way more common. And I imagine I'm not the only person here in this training who has struggled with suicidal feelings in the past, maybe even an attempt to end our lives. And I really want to be grateful and thank those of you who are here who have that history and have that past. And often many of us are currently living with in our lives, in our families, our friends, people at work, people in our communities, that it's an issue that is happening right now, that there's someone out there who's struggling with suicidal feelings. And I really want to thank you who are in that role, who you're actually in a position now where you're trying to figure out how to respond to someone else. And I really want to welcome you for joining us in this workshop. And also, I want to say, I mean, suicidal feelings are not something that it's just a past experience for me. Suicidal feelings are something that from time to time I still feel that I struggle with. I still have that experience. So I want to welcome people who are here that sometimes do and have that feeling. It doesn't mean that we're going to act on the feelings. One of the reasons that I use the phrase suicidal feelings is it's a very, very different discussion than the act of ending your life. And we're gonna get into why it's important to make that distinction. And so that's a big thing for people to acknowledge. It's a big thing for me to acknowledge. There was a lot of times in my life when I didn't tell anybody that I still sometimes struggle with suicidal feelings. And I think we're going to be talking about the reasons why people don't talk about their suicidal feelings. And it's something that is frightening, and it's frightening for ourselves. How do we respond to ourselves? So again, that's really a big part of what this training is about lowering the fear. That's one thing that I can do today in this training, is to help all of us have less fear about responding when there are suicidal feelings present. And I want to really reassure you that even though I'm someone who does from time to time in the past and possibly in the future have struggled with feelings of wanting to die, I'm committed to being here. I'm not going to end my life. That's not something that I'm going to do. So if you were to read that, oh, I just found out that Will Hall killed himself, it was a suicide, it wasn't me, it was the CIA making it look like a suicide, because that's not something I would ever do. So just keep that in mind. And is that paranoid? I'm somebody who struggles with paranoid feelings as well. That's a different training. We'll talk about that in a different training, but maybe it's not so paranoid anyway. So yeah, I'm committed to being here. And people say, well, Will, why is it that you were able to overcome those suicidal feelings? And everybody's different. I think that's one of the core messages of a disorder for everyone. And the work that Joe and Amber are doing is that we need to be met as individuals. Everybody's different, so I can't speak for why other people find reasons to be here. But I know for me, and I'm still trying to understand this and still struggling with it and still studying it, I really think that one of the reasons I'm here is because of all of you. I really think that one of the reasons that I'm here is because I'm connected with the MAD movement, the survivor movement, the critical psychiatry movement, the psychiatry skeptics movement, the people who are the anti-psychiatry, the survivors, the ex-inmates organizing movement, whatever you want to call it, but just people who've been through it. I think that's why I'm here, because that was the turnaround moment for me, is when I got connected with the psychiatric survivors movement. And there's not a big mystery to that. It's just that when we find people who've been through similar experiences, we feel closer to them. It's easier to connect. It's easier to open up. It's true of being gay. It's true of being an immigrant. It's true of having a disability. It's true of being a woman. It's true of being a person of color. And so for survivors who've been through it, if we don't have people to talk to who've been through it like us, that can be a problem. So I really believe that that's one of the big reasons that I am here, is that you are here as people who are willing to step outside of the medical framework and start to question some of the things that we've been told and to think in a new way. And I like to think of it as common sense. What we're trying to do here is common sense. We're just trying to speak as humans to each other as humans, outside of the framings and the so-called expertise that have often alienated us from our human common sense. So yeah, I feel really grateful. It's always very touching for me to work on this topic. And I've disclosed already quite a bit. You're going to hear a bit more about me in this training. And I'm a pretty public guy. I have a lot of stuff on my website. I talk about stuff all the time on Madness Radio, pretty intimate, personal stuff. There's still stuff I don't talk about. There's a lot of things I don't talk about. So I want to encourage you in this workshop to take one step out of your comfort zone, but don't take two or three or five, or don't take a leap out of your comfort zone. I mean, for a lot of us, just being here is a step out of your comfort zone. And that's great. If you just want to listen for this workshop, fantastic. Leave early, turn off the camera, whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. There's a recording. So, if you do want to take a step out of your comfort zone, then I invite you to maybe think about sharing either in the breakout rooms or as a group. All that's optional. It's completely optional. You're completely free. But like I said, just sit back and be an observer. But it often is a learning experience when we take a step out of our comfort zone. Also a bit later, I'm going to be offering you the opportunity to volunteer to kind of come up in the front of the group with me. And then we're going to be talking about the volunteers' experiences with a time in your life when you didn't want to live. And I'm just going to basically do like a mutual aid peer counseling conversation, like an interview. And so I want to let you know that you have the opportunity to volunteer for that. And if we have more than one person volunteering, we'll flip a coin or something. So that'll come later. So have that in the back of your mind that maybe you'd like to be that person. A lot of times people really get a lot out of that. They get a chance to interact more closely with me and to maybe share some of your story. And it also it puts you in the role of the teacher, because it's a real gift when you volunteer in front of a group and share your story and help us understand, and you use your experience as a bit of a teaching opportunity, a demonstration moment. You're giving a incredible gift to the group, and I'm always really grateful for volunteers. And having said that, if nobody volunteers, that's totally fine. I really want you to, freedom of choice is at the center of what we're doing here in the MAD movement. So it's absolutely your choice. In terms of the disclosure, and in terms of volunteering, and in terms of anything that you share in the chat, in terms of the breakout rooms, in terms of the questions, anything that you open up about, all this is confidential. Please, take the general learning with you far and wide. That's why Joe and Amber and I do this, is that we want everybody to learn in the whole world. But personal stuff, individual experiences, stuff that's really to be held confidentially, please do hold it confidentially. Don't be sharing people's personal experiences and personal information. So we want to have something of a confidential container here. And the confidentiality piece is super important, because that's at the heart of what I think is wrong about our medical industrial complex around suicidal feelings and suicidal conversations about suicidal things. We're going to be talking about this a bit more. So that's me. I'll just say, there's a lot of information about my work online at willhall.net. I do a radio show, Madness Radio, and there's information. I think there's 200 episodes that I've done, all kinds of different topics, including suicidal feelings. I have a guide around coming off medications. Unfortunately, we are in a world where the mental health system and medications are like this. It's hard to imagine getting a psychiatric diagnosis without also getting a prescription. And so that's one of the things we're going to be talking about. I'm not anti-medication. I'm not pro-medication. I am pro-choice from a harm reduction perspective. And a harm reduction approach is kind of the broader frame that I take for a lot of my work, including suicidal feelings. So There also is a book that I wrote. I have a copy here, which has a lot of material around suicidal feelings and suicide outside mental health. And you're welcome to buy this. And you can also get it, you can download it for free um, online on my website. It's Outside Mental Health. It's free ebook. I'm just going to share my screen and let's see. I will show you that we have a bunch of resources for this workshop that are on the website. And Joe and Amber are going to be sharing the website afterwards. And these are different training resources. I think you can see that. So just let me know if you can't see this. Um, so different handouts, links are all there. And the reason I'm showing you this now is to just kind of reassure you that the material that we're going to be presenting, you don't necessarily have to take notes a lot. The material is going to be available for you. And also one of the things that I really like to do with my trainings is to hear from folks afterwards. So if you have a question, you have a thought you want to share, please, my website, willhall.net. I am an evidence-based trainer. Everything I do and say and present is based in the research literature. I am a PhD candidate at Maastricht University School for Mental Health and Neuroscience. So some of us are sometimes in positions where we need some research backup, like, oh, Will Hall said this thing, and what's the research base for that? I'll be presenting some of that in this training. And if you need more, please, email me and I can point you in the right direction, because that's one of the cornerstones of being a social movement is having truth on your side. Gandhi called it satyagraha, which is truth force. So that's really what we're doing here is we're standing for truth. And I think that the medical system is really misguided around suicidal feelings. And so we're trying to bring some truth into the equation. So as I said, the goal of the training is really to reduce your fear and give you a little bit of confidence. Confidence in something that you already know how to do, which is to have conversations with people. Suicidal feelings is a topic that is taboo in society to talk about. We have a strong reaction. We often feel helpless. We often feel like we're not the experts, and we don't feel like we have anything to offer. And none of those things are true. There are things that we can offer. We don't have to be experts, and we're not helpless. We're able to have conversations. We're able to listen to people. We're able to have a human response. Something gets in the way of that, and I think it's our fear, and I think it's our medicalized approach. So a lot of what I feel like we're doing when we're trying to create a new response around suicidal feelings is really kind of breaking through the fear, overcoming our fear, dealing with our fear. And so one of the first things that I'd like to do this morning, and to give you a chance to kind of meet each other. There's a lot of people. We're not going to be able to do a lot of really very super interactive work like we would with a much smaller group. But I do really want people to have a chance to connect a bit. So what I'd like to do is we're going to go into breakout rooms of triads of threes. And again, it's all optional. And the prompt, I'd like you to have a 10-minute conversation in your breakout room. And the prompt is very simple, but it's also a little bit, you need to think about it a little bit. So the question is, how do I know that I'm afraid? So the question is not what is fear? The question is, how do I know when I'm afraid? And that may be very different for different people. And then the second part of the conversation is, how do I respond when I'm afraid? So it's not how should I respond or what's the best way to respond or how do I respond? Sometimes we respond different ways at different times. Sometimes we try to respond in a certain way, but we don't always respond in that way. So they're both simple questions, but they are inviting us to be a bit thoughtful. So how do I know when I'm afraid? And how do I respond when I'm afraid?
Will, can
Okay?
we just ask for some
Yeah.
clarification? Is that regarding
Please.
fear in general, or is that regarding
Yes, yes.
suicidal
Fear in
feelings?
general. Fear in general. Fear in general. Any, because fear is fear is fear. It's a thing that we do. So fear, again, it sounds like a simple thing, fear, but actually everybody's got a different relationship to fear. Um, and I think it would be wonderful to have a conversation about that. How do I know I'm afraid, and how do I respond when I'm afraid? And in your breakout room, Amber is going to help us with switching. So you're going to have about between 3 and 5 minutes each. We'll do like 10 to 15 minutes in the breakout room. And Amber will notify us when you want to wind things down and then you want to switch so that you have an opportunity for everybody to speak. If someone just wants to be an observer, that's fine. If you have too many observers in your breakout group, that's also fine. Just chat Amber and we'll sort that out. Um, and then as use your listening skills. Make sure that you share the mic, make sure that if someone's taking too much time, you kind of gently encourage them to share the time with others and use your listening skills. So it's about giving people space. It's about silence. It's about being curious. If someone feels a little bit stuck or there's something that they said that really sparked your interest, go ahead and ask a question about that. Help them kind of open up a bit about it. So, okay. Is that clear? Amber, is that clear now? Yeah. Okay, great. All right. So we'll go into our breakout rooms, and
I'm
then
going to open the I'm going
afterwards
to
we'll
open the rooms now,
okay.
and hopefully you should all be taken into those rooms. Any problems, there is a call for help button once you're in there, but hopefully this will all run
Yeah,
smoothly.
and we'll hear a little bit of report backs afterwards. So, okay, thanks everybody. See you on the other side. Oh my goodness, everyone's disappearing. Wow, there they go. There they go. We have Andrea and Kelly.
They've frozen, so they're between us and the breakout
Okay.
rooms.
Okay. All right. So you'll keep track like about 3 minutes. You'll encourage
Yeah, I'll
people
send a message. That's fine.
to wind down. And Joe, how you doing? You're there with us, I know.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Okay. And yeah. I don't know if you guys
Brilliant.
get allergies in the spring, but I start to get a little slightly, every year is different, but sometimes I get a little bit of scratchy throat in the spring. And okay, let's see. Yeah, so Amber, you're keeping track of time. Is everybody in their room?
They are. We're just Kelly's just struggling.
Okay. Okay, I'll let you.
That's
Sure.
yeah. There's not a lot we can do, unfortunately. They're frozen
Okay.
between
Okay.
here and there.
Okay, so can you, if there's a group of two, can you just tell them to get started without waiting for
Yeah,
the
I'm
person?
sure. Yeah, they would have done. Yeah, they would have
Okay.
just cracked on.
Okay, great. Okay. I think I'm gonna nip off to the loo again.
Yeah,
Stretch a
you
little
carry
bit.
on. That's fine. I'm just clock watching. So
Yeah, okay. And well, if something comes up, sometimes people they have in the breakout rooms, they have a question or something that comes up. So I'll be back in just one minute, but I'm here.
yeah, that's fine. Nobody's asked for help at the moment, so we're assuming they've started
Okay,
and they're talking.
great.
I might nip off myself.
You carry on, Joe.
Crack,
I'm not.
crack
I'm
on.
not. I'm not. I'm
Crack
energetic.
on.
I just couldn't resist it.
Crack on, Joe. We don't say crack on. That's what we
Do you
crack
not say
on.
crack on either?
Crack on, crack on. So when you nip
What's
when you
your
nip
What's
off,
your
crack on.
equivalent? What's your equivalent to crack on?
Uh, go for it.
Oh yeah. Go for it's good. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go for it. All right. God, it's not quite the same. Crack on.
No, it's not. It's not the same.
I'm going to think about that one, Joe. I'll get back to you.
Oh, I just got a message back off Di, who's seen well, it would imply that she is doing fine with the closed captions in the breakout rooms, which is great.
Fab.
Because that used to be very difficult, didn't it? Nobody really could understand how to do it, but apparently something's changed on Zoom to make that easy now, which
Yeah.
good.
No, it needs to be more accessible, doesn't it? So that's
Yeah.
good. Okay, I'm gonna broadcast a message.
It's very clever.
Oh, did you get it?
Yeah.
You can do a voiceover on broadcast, but that scares the hell out of everybody. Oh.
I'm here, but I forgot to plug in. Now you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a corded microphone that I keep every training. I unplug it to walk around and then I forget to plug it in. So if sometimes if you can't hear me and I'm unmuted, I'm not muted, then that might be the problem, but I'm going to try
Okay.
So, okay.
Well, can you send me your PayPal email at some point as well?
Can I send you my what?
PayPal email.
Oh, right. Yes.
Just the easiest way to make a payment to the United States because it's just easier than doing it through backs. Is that all right?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Cool.
I
But a
can
couple of people have lost connection, so they might be joining the main room.
Okay.
Kelly, are
I
you
can
there?
Hi,
Hi,
hello.
Kelly.
Sorry, I'm
That's
having
all right.
some issues. I'm so
Yeah,
sorry.
do you remember who you were with?
Harmony,
Fantastic, wonderful. I'll pop you back in room 4.
thank you so much. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Joe, have you been telling them to switch after 3 minutes or so?
Yeah, I've been
Amber
doing
has,
that.
Oh,
Yeah.
great. Okay. You're on it.
She
You're on
really
it.
is.
Do we say that in, do you say that
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
England?
Yeah, we do say that.
We do
Okay.
when Amber's here in the room because she always is on it.
All right, you crack on, Amber.
Crack on. Okay, so they've got a final minute, and then they've got like a countdown as well. So they'll start coming back within the next minute. I think
Okay,
there's like 51 at the moment on the call. So
okay, everybody
just
like
keep an eye on the counter, and I'll let you know when everyone's back.
Well, you've done really good with numbers, Will, because it's usually about, well, I think it's been 50% or less in the last few that we've done.
Yes,
So this is like really good turnout.
and considering the
yeah.
timings as well.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
Right, we've got a
suicidal
couple that have
feelings
been
is,
kicked out of the.
yeah, suicidal
Outs-
feelings is super, yeah. So here we go. Terry's back. Welcome,
Hi,
Terry.
yeah, I think Terry unfortunately got thrown out of Zoom. Terry, we've only
Oh.
got 15 seconds, so I'll leave you here rather than put you back in the
Okay.
breakout room just to come back again.
Sorry about
No,
that,
and in
Terry.
fairness, it wasn't an issue on your side. I'm here. It's dinner time in Ireland, so I had to feed the kids. So
Oh, bless
sorry.
you.
So apologies.
That's right. Everyone's back in 30 seconds. It's absolutely fine.
Hello, everybody. Come back.
So 10 seconds and we should have all the rooms shut.
Great. Great. Thank you for being part of that. Yeah, really, to me, I think that often what we do in mental health is that we think about we're going to work on a mental health issue, and then we go into this specialized kind of expert domain of pharmacology and neurology and neuroscience. And actually, mental health is just about being human. So much of it is about understanding how fear gets in the way. So that's why I really like to center the conversations around suicidal feelings, about how do we deal with fear. All of you, I'm sure, respond to fear in certain ways. A lot of people wouldn't even join a training like this because it's too scary. So I think that we all have ways of dealing with fear, knowing that we are afraid, and also saying, okay, what am I gonna do about this? So I really welcome hearing a few report backs. If someone would like to say, don't share anything personal about your mates in the breakout room, but if you want to just share what you discovered, maybe something surprising or something interesting to you, both about how you know when you're afraid and how you respond to it. If anybody would like to share, someone want to, I guess you could put your hand up, or yeah, it's like we have Alice has their hand up. Amber, do you want to? Yeah. I don't know if we can we hear you, Alice? Hi there,
Can you
Alice.
hear me? Hi.
Hi.
I realized that what I wrote down was everything was very physical. The things that I realize when I'm nervous, because sometimes I think I'm okay. But what I realize is I notice an increased heart rate. I notice clammy hands, knots in my stomach, that it was actually all the physical responses are what tell me that I'm scared of something, not so much what I'm thinking about.
Interesting. That's so interesting. Yeah, thank you for having such an embodied response. So is it sometimes you will have these physical responses and you won't even realize you're afraid? But
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
I tend to lie to myself and think that I'm absolutely fine. And I've had moments where you think, oh, you'd think I'd be stressed about this, but I'm fine. And then I'll get really ill, or I'll get a bout of eczema, which I never normally have. And it is actually how it often comes out. I don't realize it comes out in a physical way.
So interesting. I mean, I think a lot of us, and me as well, have our body is trying to tell us something a lot of the time. And then Alice, so you're afraid, and then you don't realize that you're afraid. Your body tells you that you're afraid, but is the fear affecting you? Is it changing your behavior, or is it making you avoid things or be more like narrow in your thinking, or how maybe is the fear affecting you?
I think only once I realize that I'm fearful.
Yes.
And we talked about in a group, it depends on the circumstance. If it's something that I can avoid, I might avoid it. But if I can't, then I try to think about breathing, and I try to think about distracting myself, so I'm not consciously thinking, oh my God, my stomach is really hurting. Oh, and then I start to get, it almost makes it worse realizing that I'm nervous or I'm stressed or I'm fearful.
Interesting. Yeah, sometimes if I am afraid, but I don't realize it, and then I notice it, I'm like, oh, maybe this is why I'm defensive right now, or maybe this is why I'm so focused on figuring something. I've sort of narrowed so very interesting. Thank you, Alice. Is there somebody else who wanted to share a little bit?
Yeah, Emma's popped their hand up.
Okay.
So Emma, if you're happy to unmute yourself and come in.
We'll just do one or two quick responses. So yeah, go ahead, Emma.
Hi,
You have your camera off. You're welcome to keep it off if you want, but just so you know that it's on.
yeah, I might disappear because I've got no broadband, so I'm hotspotting for my phone.
Oh.
So it's a bit hit and miss. So, well, using the label, I've got a dissociative disorder, and when a part of me sort of feels that fear, I feel a regression in myself, or almost returning to a sort of primitive, childlike,
yeah.
Response that, is obviously reminiscent of fear in my childhood, and my sort of reflexive responses to catastrophize everything, and everything becomes blown out of proportion. And I freeze. I can't sort of mobilize clarity of thought to really unpack what's going on, and is this source of fear sort of trigger based, or is it really valid, and if it is, what can I then do for myself to calm myself down? And I'm quite sort of disconnected from my body, but I'm trying to sort of work on that at the last couple of years and notice what's going on for me. And I realized that I feel this tightness in my chest. I hold my shoulders like they're frozen, and my heart rate's going up, and anxiety
I think
taking flight.
Yeah, you have a thank you so much, Emma. You have we got lucky. The first two responses, people very embodied. That's one of the things I really like people to notice your bodies. That's a very helpful thing, because the body really can show us. Thank you for that, Emma. And yeah, you seem to have a lot of clarity and understanding, a lot of work on yourself. You said something so important. It's like you regress, like fear almost can make us be a different person. Like it can make us be a firefighter or the child role, or you catastrophize. And then we often freeze. And I think my sense is that the entire medical system has an almost regressed, catastrophized, frozen, sort of very, very childlike response to suicidal feelings. It's a very reactive, very like, we've got to fix this. It's a panic response almost, but then it gets turned into policy, right? It gets turned into standard medical practice, where everybody is just like, this is how we do it. And listen, if there's a car accident, if I'm hit on my bicycle, I mean, God forbid, but it has happened in the past, then yeah, I definitely want those EMTs to go in and just take charge. But when we're dealing with human connection and listening and understanding someone's unique individuality, those like emergency response skills that the fear and the stress and the tightness and might put us into are not the skills that we want, that we really want to notice if we're having these fear responses. Thank you so much, Emma. That's really helpful for all this. Let's do one more. Is it Annie? Annie?
Hi,
Yeah.
yeah, it's Annie.
Hi,
Hello.
Annie.
Hi. Yeah, I was just going to say, and Emma said some of it. So, a history of trauma and just frightened of absolutely everything. So, and just completely unaware of it really as a young person. And then all the behavioral things, all the rage, all the drugs, the alcohol, etc., came out of that. So when I took all of those things away, then I realized that I was just literally frightened of absolutely everything. So
Wow.
now I'm older and I've learned a lot about myself. I try to lean into the things that I become aware of. So for me, it is physical, but it's also behavioral. It's much more behavioral. I will avoid things. That's the first thing that I will notice if I'm frightened. I'll start avoiding things, people, situations, whatever. And so how I respond to that is I try and lean into it a bit. So like you were saying about coming out of your comfort zone, I'm very much out of my comfort zone. But that's the leaning in, So
Great. That's great.
yeah, and part of just getting through the day really when you're terrified of everything is not a very easy thing to
Thank
do.
you.
So
Thank you, Annie. I can really, thank you for leaning into your courage to speak. That's really, I think you speak for a lot of us. I think a lot of us, I mean, I definitely, there's a background kind of being fear of everything that I've in a trauma response, learning it in childhood. And then think about how what we're describing, being afraid of everything, avoiding has come up a few times. Think about how that kind of permeates our relationship to suicidal feelings. Isn't that what we do as a culture? We avoid, we just completely, we just don't want to go there. We catastrophize things. We feel like it's just overwhelming to us. So it's like this background fear that we don't want to deal with. And then that can drive our behavior. I like that you bring it into behavior because that's really where we may have choice. So thank you so much, Annie. So this is all really helpful. And I think you now, as students, understand this direct connection. There really isn't a way to work on responding to suicidal feelings without also working on how do we respond to fear. Because that is what, and the huge gift, I think, when someone says to you that they have suicidal feelings, is that they're here. They haven't actually ended their lives. It's a huge gift. Many times people don't talk about it. And sometimes people never talk about it. Just suddenly, and then we can imagine, oh, well, there were signs or they were trying to talk about, but they didn't talk about it. And then they're gone. And then we realize many people are like that. It's a huge gift to talk about suicidal feelings. When in my client work and in groups, if someone comes to me and says, hey, well, yeah, I was really feeling like, oh, I just want to give up. And I've been thinking a lot about it. I'm like, thank you for telling me. Why? Because I'd rather they tell me than be alone with it, right? It's a complete reversal. We would think that that moment of someone telling us is a moment to be afraid. Actually, it's in a way, it's a moment to be grateful. You see, the fear comes from other pieces of the puzzle. Oh, what do I do? What do I do? Well, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that. Huge piece of research that I want you all to please understand. This is very well established globally. If we take the number of people who actually kill themselves, it's a certain level. The number of people who think about it, who consider it, it's hugely more people have suicidal feelings than actually end their lives intentionally. Suicidal feelings is common. It's common. I think that a recent study was 1 in 8 teenagers in the United States. This is a horrifying reality. 1 in 8 teenagers have thought about suicide. Suicidal feelings is very common. The act of suicide, actually ending your life, is very rare. Is very rare. Humans are animals. We have an incredible life instinct. You get hungry, eventually you're going to eat. You get cold, eventually you're going to try and find warmth. So you're going to try and survive. So the number of people that end their lives compared to the people who have suicidal feelings, it's a very big difference. Now, of course, sometimes people who have suicidal feelings do end their lives, and that's why we're afraid. We're afraid because we don't know. But the beginning of the conversation is to separate out when you are talking with somebody or you're encountering suicidal feelings. You are not, it's not the same as someone who is in the act of committing suicide. It sounds like a very simple distinction, but look at how the medical system and the police system responds. They don't make this distinction. They don't make this distinction. Suicidal feelings are common. Suicide itself is very rare. So I hope that's reassuring. I mean, to me, learning about that statistically, because I think what we're taught is like, oh, when someone starts to talk about it, it's like it's going to happen. No, it might, but we don't know. The number of people who talk about it or have the suicidal feelings compared to the numbers who actually attempt or commit suicide, very, very different numbers. So this is why I use the phrase suicidal feelings. It's very different than, because when we're talking about suicidal feelings, you can talk with the person. When we're talking about suicide, the person is gone. You can't talk to them. And so I want to present something to you very, very important, very, very important in terms of research. So there is an incredible realm of suicidology. I didn't know about this. It's called suicidology. And it involves sociology, economics, history, anthropology, medicine, literature, and psychiatry and psychology. Suicidology is this huge. So they have these conferences, they have these journals, they talk to each other. Of course, the number one question is, why do people kill themselves? I don't know if I like the word commit, because it kind of sounds like a crime. It's sort of like it's a whole other conversation. But why do people kill themselves? Why would this person kill themselves, but this person wouldn't? That's the number one question. That's like the question of the entire realm of suicidology, which has been around for, I don't know, 50 years, 60 years, even longer. Do you know what the answer is? The answer is we don't know. That's the answer. That's the answer. Now, the unknown, we didn't touch on it so much in the conversation we just had. But the unknown, let's think about the unknown. The unknown can be the unknown, or it can be, oh, wow, I don't know what's going to happen after work. Maybe I'm going to hang out. The unknown, or the unknown can be terrifying. The unknown is just the unknown, right? So suicidology gives us this incredible gift of, like, we don't know what causes one person to commit suicide when another person doesn't end their life. So we're a lot freer from our fear. We're a lot freer from our fear because we don't know. We can greet the unknown with openness. Well, I don't know what's going to happen to this person. Or I can greet the unknown with my worst fear response of, like, oh, the unknown, I have my child, my experiences, oh, the unknown. So suicidology, in its strange way, by being completely useless and giving us answers, is kind of giving us a big, wonderful gift and an answer. So I'm going to go a little bit more deeply into that in a few minutes with some of the research, because I think it's quite startling once you get into the research about this. So, but I want to tell a little bit about my story. So, as Joe and Amber know, I have, a long history in the psychiatric system. I've had lots of different diagnoses. I went into the system because they assessed me as suicidal. And I was in a really dark place. I was in the realm of what would be called psychotic. I ended up being diagnosed schizophrenic. And one of the experiences that I was having, it's complicated and there's a lot of pieces to that. But one of the experiences I was having was I wanted to die. I was just like this. And my experience of that, everyone's different, was I had failed my life. I felt incredible guilt. And I had a very aggressive voice telling me I lived in San Francisco at the time, and San Francisco is famous for lots of things. We're famous for cable cars. We're famous for we're famous for uncaring billionaires that destroy our real estate market. And we're also famous for the Golden Gate Bridge. So I went to the Golden Gate Bridge. I went to the Golden Gate Bridge. And I was there on the Golden Gate Bridge, and I was looking down into it's San Francisco, so you don't really see the water, you see the fog, right? So I was looking down, I was there, and I wanted to die. That was it. I was right there. And I think you know how the story ends, because I didn't kill myself, or else this would be a very different training. Amber would be channeling me from the other side or something, and I would just be, I didn't. But I was there and I wanted to. And people say, well, Will, why did you not kill yourself? What happened? And I remember when I was there, I was in a very out of it state. I hadn't been sleeping. I hadn't been eating properly. I wasn't talking to anybody, much less talking about my feelings, much less talking about my feelings of wanting to die. I had no understanding of what this voice hearing experience was. I was just overwhelmed. I was in what's called the startle phase, like the first beginning of your voice hearing before you start to have any kind of relationship with your voices. And I was there, and I was very disoriented. I remember that there was a flower that was stuck in the railing there. They had these big cables, and there's this sort of railing, and there was a flower. And I was like, oh, what? So what is a flower doing up here? And of course, someone had left a flower, because someone had, as many people have, someone had gone to the bridge and they had ended their life, and someone who remembered them was putting that flower. And so ever since then, I've wondered about that flower and why I'm not here. And part of me, I was in a workshop, and part of me says, I don't know, why didn't you kill yourself, Will? I don't know. And someone in the workshops raised their hand and they said, hey, Will, maybe it was that flower. Maybe there was a spirit in that flower, or maybe I'll never know. I'll never know. But I do know that there was some act of caring and kindness and memory. And that's, I think, ultimately all that we can bring to this, is our hearts and our caring and our concern. And so I came down from the bridge, and I contacted my therapist, like you do. And my therapist said, well, go to the clinic for a change of medications. So this is something that I think psychiatry doesn't recognize, and I think it needs to be understood, is that often the medications that we're taking can drive suicidal feelings, drive suicidal ideation. And it's not just the psychiatric medications, although it's quite disturbing to learn that the SSRI antidepressants can actually cause suicidal feelings in some people, especially adolescents. It's a very disturbing thought, but it's not just the psychiatric medications, and it's pretty much all of them, but it's also any medications, that anti-malaria drugs, steroids. There's lots of different medications that can be driving these things. Substances that we take can be driving, allergies that we can take. There's a whole literature on chemical reactions. Someone is exposed to some toxin in the environment, and the reaction can drive the agitation of suicidal feelings. So I think all those factors were playing into but my therapist never asked, you know, maybe the meds you're on may be playing a role here. Instead, the therapist said, well, you know, maybe you need an increase in your medication, you need a meds adjustment, so go to the clinic, talk to them about getting a medication. Now, later I learned that my therapist is talking to my past therapist behind my back, which I never authorized. So I go to the clinic, and the door of the clinic, you don't just open the door to this clinic. You buzz an intercom, and then you tell them that you have an appointment, or you tell them, in my case, the situation, and then they buzz the door opens, you walk in, and then the door locks behind you. I had no idea. Talk about informed consent. I had no idea what was starting to unfold. I had never met anybody who had been locked up in the psychiatric system. My father had, which is also something that was never talked about when I was in the hospital, but we never talked about it. It's not something that my father was ever comfortable talking about with me. So I just thought I was going in, they were going to talk with them. Maybe I'll get some therapy. So I went in, I sat down, they started asking me questions. How are you feeling? I feel really depressed. I have those, you know, do you feel like you wanted to? Oh yeah. You feel like you have the means? Oh yeah. I wanted help. I was telling them all these things, very vulnerable. I was answering their questions honestly by telling them that yes, I was suicidal. And so they kept saying, well, the doctor's going to meet with you. The doctor's going to meet with you. And then finally, 9 o'clock, I was there about 7 hours. Finally, the doctor, the clinic starts to close. And I realized that basically what they had been doing is they had been observing me like some kind of wild animal that they had in captivity. And I said, well, you know, I want to go home because I want to go to work. I had a job. I had a hard time holding a job. And at this point I understood, like, okay, well, I'm not going to end my life. You know, I'm in a lot of suffering, but I want to go to work. I don't want to lose my job. Sorry, we're keeping you here. This was shocking to me. I had no idea that this is what was happening. And then they said, we need to put you in restraints because that's how we transfer you to the hospital. Now, you have to understand, I was very much like this. I was not, in my shock, I was not arguing. I certainly wasn't aggressive. I was terrified, absolutely terrified. And as this situation unfolded, I got more and more and more and more into myself. And they strapped me into a chair and they transported me in the back of a dark van alone to psychiatric emergency services in San Francisco. Psychiatric emergency service. I cannot imagine a worse place to take somebody who was in the kind of vulnerability that I was in. They were bringing in people who were out of their minds because of alcohol and methamphetamine. It was a crowded, very loud space. There was violence happening. So I just go deeper and deeper, and the shock of that. The experience of being put into restraints, I had nightmares of being raped. And then afterwards, I would be interviewed and they would say, well, what's going on? What happened? And what happened? What are you talking about? You essentially assaulted and kidnapped me, and now I'm in jail. That's what happened. But as we often discuss in the critical psychiatry movement, the MAD movement, and A Disorder for Everyone discusses this quite often, the system is quite crazy. It's crazy making everything that should be the obvious. What do you mean, how am I doing? I just got assaulted, kidnapped, and incarcerated. How am I doing? That was all normal to them. They were interested in their clinical interview. And this started a whole year-long, I was absolutely traumatized by the treatments. This is what it was called, treatments, right? Now, I want to step back and I want to say that I do know people that find sanctuary in hospitals. I find people that have good experiences. I'm not anti-medications. I'm not anti the decision to go into the hospitals. But my experience was that I went in with a lot of problems. Now I have way more problems. One of which is that this is an incredible learning experience, don't talk about your suicidal feelings. I believe that we have something called that maybe you could call the suicide industrial complex now, that the system punishes people for talking about suicidal feelings. One of the first things you learn when you're locked up is act normal, take your meds, and don't talk about suicidal feelings. That's how you get released. You learn. I have a friend who was locked up in the hospital, and I asked her, I said, well, did you get anything out of it? She said, oh yeah, I got a lot out of it. My 2 months in the hospital was like a 2 months acting workshop. I learned how to act normal. And so this is part of this backwards reality that we have, is that our interventions around suicidal feelings, I believe, are causing more suicide, because I believe that people being free to talk about their suicidal feelings is crucial to working through, because it's common sense. Any problem that you have, talking about it with other people can be crucial to working it through. So for years, I was under this belief, which was told to me over and over again. Well, you know, Mr. Hall, okay, you had a bad experience with the restraints, and you were locked up for several months, and okay, it's an unpleasant experience, and you didn't get to go outside, and all these things happened to you. You were in an isolation room, and all these, but we had to do it because you were suicidal. We were protecting you from suicide. So I started to investigate that, and I learned that that's actually not true. That one of the cornerstones of the psychiatric system's treatment, that locking people up, medications, diagnosis, there actually is no good evidence base for that is actually preventing suicides. In fact, the one time when the highest rate of suicide completion is right after release from the hospital. So there's a direct line between the treatments and suicide itself. So I spent a lot of time unlearning a lot of what I went through, unlearning a lot of what was taught to me. And the experience was not just my experience. I learned that this is a lot of people's experience. And I'm sure that in this training, a lot of you are hearing resonance and hearing like similarities and hearing a lot of the same kinds of things. Maybe not, maybe some of them had better experiences. Great. I'm glad for you that you had some positive experiences. But what I learned was that actually this happens over and over and over. I'm sure right now, something similar to my experience is happening in my town area, in your town. This is a structural problem. This is business as usual, to the point of there being a movement, a global movement, to overturn this treatment, this horrific normalized violence that happens to people. I came out of the system, my the system did nothing for me, absolutely nothing for me in terms of improving my suicidal feelings. What made a difference, what did improve, what made me take that turn from having suicidal feelings to and not knowing whether I was going to kill myself, to now when I do sometimes have suicidal feelings, knowing that I'm not going to do it. The difference for me was overcoming my isolation and getting some sense of empowerment in my life. I think that a lot of what we call mental health issues are really lack of connection and lack of empowerment, lack of control, lack of choice, lack of agency, including the choice and agency to make your own meaning, to understand what's happening. When I went into the system, suicidal feelings, it's a breakdown. It's a symptom of a disease. It's one of the signs of schizophrenia. It's one of the signs of depression. And it's a chemical imbalance. It's a genetic, neurochemical, neuroscientific. That was a sense of meaning that was imposed on me. And is constantly, they keep trying to impose on me all the time. And everywhere in the media, on the internet, websites, it's constant the same. What I did was I changed my relationship where I created new meaning. And now my experience is, and I think we started to hint at it when people were talking about some of their body experiences being kind of messengers. I see suicidal feelings as messengers. I see them as they're trying to tell me something. Something's not right. Something's not working. Something needs to change. Do I have the power to make the change? That's the question. Do I have even the power of hope? That, okay, I don't have the power now, but I have the hope that it could. But I think that's what we've lost in our understanding of suicidal feelings, is we've lost that the person really wants change. The other main thing is that suicidal feelings are normal. In fact, there are cultures, there's an entire literature of melancholia, the Victorian Romantic era. Suicidal feelings were venerated as a sign of sensitivity, an artistic soul. We know about the honor suicides that are associated with duty. I mean, I don't know that much about Japanese culture, but there is a sense that at some time historically, suicide was considered an honorable thing. So we need to take a step back and recognize that the meaning that we impose around suicidal feelings isn't the only way of thinking about it. And it may be disempowering to the person to think, oh, I just have this wiring in my mind that make things worse, and so I have to take these medications. Well, actually, maybe the suicidal feelings are messengers. Maybe they're trying to show you something needs to change. So I'll leave it with that. I want to go to a break. Let's do about a 10, 12-minute break. And then we'll come back, and I'm happy to get some comments or thoughts after hearing my story. And then we'll as you say in England, we'll crack on. Okay. Are we back? Everybody's back? Are we back? Yeah. Everybody's slowly coming back. All right. I'm happy to, if people have questions or thoughts about my sharing, but first, before we do that, I want to read a poem by why is it whenever suicidal poetry comes in, but somehow they're connected. But I like poetry. I think poetry is really interesting. It's a space where people get deeply intimate and talk about very, very, very powerful emotions in a very detailed kind of way. Poetry is very wonderful. I want to read a poem by one of America's great poets, Marilyn Monroe. You know that she was a poet? She's actually really quite a good poet. This is a poem by Marilyn Monroe. Oh, damn. I wish that I were dead. Absolutely non-existent. Gone away from here. From everywhere. But how would I do it? There's always bridges. The Brooklyn Bridge. No, not the Brooklyn Bridge. Because I love that bridge. Everything is beautiful from there. And the air is so clean. Walking it seems peaceful there, even with all those cars going crazy underneath. So it would have to be some other bridge, an ugly one, and with no view. Except I like, in particular, all bridges. There's something about them, and besides, I've never seen an ugly bridge. So I like that poem very much because it shows the conflict. And one of the things about suicidal feelings is if there's no conflict, the person is going to be dead. If a person wants to kill themselves, they will find a way. There's a conflict. And I think that's part of what we can do as listeners is to understand, where's this conflict? This person is telling me about their suicidal feelings. A part of them doesn't want to die. What part of them is that? And then what is the part that wants to die? And that's where I think we understand the idea of a messenger, or the idea of suicidal feelings as being a demand for change, maybe even a revolutionary demand for change. Something really needs to change, something that's so important that the person's willing to die if the change doesn't happen. People say sometimes, and this is in the medical depression literature, it's like a giving up. Like suicide suicidal feelings, suicide is like a giving up of living. I don't see it that way at all. Someone who gives up on living, they go to work, to a job they don't like, they come back to a marriage they don't like, they hang out with their family and they don't enjoy it, they do things they don't believe in, then they go back to work. That's someone who's given up on life. I think the suicidal feelings is a part of you really wants a different life, a different life. And then you feel so powerless to get it. But the people around you, there's no interest, there's no exploration, there's no understanding. When I have suicidal feelings now, I'm curious, like, well, when did these start? What is the situation? Oh, I'm in a conflict with my partner I haven't been dealing with. Wait a second, someone at work stepped on me in a really big way, and I didn't do anything about it. Oh, wait a second, I need a change in my relationship. I feel like there's something going on inside of me, and I don't even listen to myself around it, much less tell anybody. I need to change. I need to be listening to this part of myself. So the suicidal feelings can be an incredibly generative moment for something new that can happen, something, a new direction or a new priority. Once you get into a relationship with it, once you start to maybe lower the fear. So, so why don't we, if people are there thoughts or comments or questions about the presentation I gave? Looks like Julia has their hand up, and Amber, maybe if you can call on one or two people, and then we'll come back to the
Absolutely. Happy to go with Julia first, whose
Please,
hand
yeah.
was promptly raised. So Julia's ready to go.
Right, thanks. I completely agree with what you were saying about this being to do with change. I'm not saying that's the whole picture. I'm saying that the picture is, on my view, is very nuanced and has, there's a whole palette of possibilities around this subject.
I would say, yeah, I would say thank you. I would say often it's a
Yeah,
need for change,
yeah.
but not always. Sometimes you're just having a side effect of a drug, for example.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not, sorry, I didn't mean to imply that you're saying there's just one. I'm just saying that I really agree with what you're saying about this, a part of you needing change. And it's one of the things which I've naively mentioned in my search for a therapist to help me. And I have literally been, as it were, rejected by a number of therapists who, claim to be specialists in the sort of dissociative disorder I have as a result of trauma. And I found that that's it. So it kind of goes full circle. On the one hand, what you're saying, I think is totally right. I think there's a piece about the potential to unwrap that, what you're talking about when you're talking about suicide, into something which is transformative and helpful. But my experience is that what happens is, as soon as that subject is mentioned, and I will mention it quite innocently, there are parts of me which are suicidal, there are other parts of me which do not want to die, there are other parts who never think about it, and I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing for me to say, because that's how it is. But as soon as you say the word, it's somehow your dissociation kind of disappears, and you are just solely one totally integrated person who has this one intention, and then you become a threat.
Very well said.
You see what I mean? And so then the red flag goes up, and I think it then goes full circle to what you were saying originally about being isolated on your own. So I'm then kicked out on my own with no one to talk to, because of the perception of the threat they become to who might be feeling responsible when they don't want.
Yeah, because of really what you're describing is the fear of the provider.
Yeah.
A lot of thank you, Julia. Thank you for that. So a lot of the psychiatric system, the mental health system, is set up to protect the providers. These standards of care, the fact that, okay, they do an assessment and then they put you into a locked unit. This is because this is the standard that's established for the system, so that they can avoid, in the US, they can avoid litigation, lawsuits, this kind of thing, so they can all look at each other and say, okay, we did the right thing here. But it's really about protecting the protection. As we saw in my story, I wasn't protected. I was actually harmed quite violently in that hospitalization. And Julia, you point out something very, very important, is that in that moment when I disclose that I have suicidal feelings, now a lot of times the provider feels obligated, or even they're required by their job to break confidentiality. So this is another important thing I really want everybody to understand. If you are working as a professional, you got to tell them what the limits of the confidentiality are to begin with. You see, you don't want to ambush someone saying, "Oh yeah, I'm open. Let's talk about your problems." You come in, you talk about suicidal feelings. Now the person has broken confidentiality. The provider has broken confidentiality with you, which is an incredible kind of trauma. It's a betrayal trauma. And the way in which we navigate systems, if we are working in those systems, you have to be aware of what the limitations are about bringing a more open approach of listening to people. And then I think we have to get to work changing the culture of these systems. I think it's wonderful when providers disclose about their own struggles, whether it's with addiction or depression or anxiety. Because I mean, who do you want to learn from? Somebody who studied stuff in a book, or someone who's been through hell themselves? Yeah. The AA model, 12 steps, is wonderful. There's limitations to it. It's not for everyone, I understand. But there are starting to be groups like the Alternatives to Suicide support groups in Western Massachusetts in the United States, where people can come together openly and talk about their suicidal feelings. There are therapists that you can find who will agree. There are places that you can call, like I think the Samaritans has a policy that they do not track you down. Some suicide lines will track you down. I've talked with people and met people who literally have a knock on their door while they're having what they think is a confidential conversation with the suicide hotline. So thank you, Julia. You raised something really super important. And to me, we need spaces for people like you, even though you're very sophisticated. And we share this, like, look, a part of me feels suicidal, but a part of me knows I'm not going to do it. And I just want to learn what the message is. And you've obviously learned a lot about yourself, and you have a lot to teach these providers. And hopefully that's the change we can make in the system. Let's do one more response and feedback.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Delu has their hand up.
Blue, yeah.
Hi. This has been so interesting. It's really taken me back to when I first trained as a psychiatric nurse back in early 1990s. And it was very much we had this rhetoric from our teachers, our professors, that, you know, you don't worry so much about the ones that talk about suicide or say that they are suicidal, because they're talking about it, so they're not going to do it. But you put them on suicide watch anyway. So you follow them around everywhere and make them really traumatized, can't even go to the toilet and shut the door, things like that, which is awful, absolutely awful. But then it was also, you're not allowed to talk to them about their suicidal thoughts or emotions either. It was like, no, it's the same as hearing voices. You're not allowed to talk about those voices.
Right. That's right.
Because that's colluding with the suicidal emotions, the voice that they're hearing, all of those things. And then just over 10 years ago, I retrained as a counsellor, and I went through that all again. It's like, but from a counselling perspective, if anyone tells you that they're hearing voices or that they're suicidal feelings or anything like that, you have to report it.
Right. Yeah,
have
the
to
US.
break that confidentiality, the same as you're saying. And I go against the grain personally. I'm like, no, you want to talk about it? Bring it on. No, I'm not going to
Glad to
report
hear
you.
that.
No, I'm not going to.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah, I find it quite strange that as a caring profession, we're constantly traumatizing people by not allowing them to talk about things and by breaking confidentiality.
You said very, very well. Thank you. And thank you for your experience too, as someone who's retrained and who's going against the grain in that way. And we need more professionals like you. I'm very grateful that you are out there doing this work. It's more than maddening. I think it's a human rights atrocity. I think this is a fundamental violation of people's human rights to have freedom of conscience, to have the freedom to live with disabilities, to live with different ways of thinking and way of being in the world. Yeah, the way in which psychiatry has normalized violence and then imposed a clinical language over what is essentially assault, kidnapping, torture. I think that a lot of our experiences in the psychiatric system essentially amount to torture. So thank you so much for that. I want to just mention, I want to highlight, we're not focused so much on the research here, but I just want to highlight something that I discovered when I started to study this question, like, well, we needed to lock you up because we were protecting you from suicide. And then we do these suicide assessments. I learned that there isn't any science behind it. In fact, it's established legally in court contexts that you can't kind of sue your psychiatrist for not protecting your family member because the family member was under your care, as long as they were following the basic rules because they can't predict. They can't actually predict whether one person is going to end their life or not. This is established in legal context. It's established in the clinical literature, and it's summarized in this document, which is linked in your webpage, where the U.S. Army just looked at all the research and said, sorry, you can't predict. Now we can look at things like risk factors, like being male is a risk factor. Having someone in your family who ended their life is a risk factor. Recently being unemployed is a risk factor. Being over 50, there are all these risk factors, and you would think that it adds up to being able to predict, but it absolutely does not. And so this paper reinforces that and summarizes, and it says here, behavioral providers do not currently have the information they need to predict suicidal behaviors. There is no ability to predict that. And so the well-intentioned interventions may be targeting many for whom the intervention is not needed. And then listen to this. This is almost something that you would hear from the survivor movement. Interventions to prevent suicide may violate confidentiality, harm the therapeutic relationship, increase stigma associated with treatment, decrease the probability of forthright conversations about suicidal ideation in the future, and increase the probability of treatment dropout. So this is the kind of like the smoking gun of this human rights atrocity that we're talking about, is that there's nothing in the research that supports it. In fact, honest research supports what the psychiatric survivor movement and critical psychiatry has been saying. So when I meet and talk with people, one of the guideposts that I use in my conversations about suicidal feelings, there's a lot of things, but I'll say a couple of them. One is, I want to listen very, very deeply, and I want to listen to the point where I understand why it makes sense to want to die. So, for example, young people have suicidal feelings, and someone is 19-year-old young woman, and I might say, okay, well, what's going on? I had a breakup. My boyfriend dumped me. That's why I wanted to kill myself. Now, do I really understand? I don't think so, because my 58-year-old self is saying, but I ask, well, tell me about your boyfriend, right? He's the first person I ever could talk to about my feelings. He's the first person I ever opened up to about my conflict with my parents. He's the first person I ever felt safe with. Now I know that I'll never have anyone. Now I understand why that person is suicidal, right? So if you do want to have these conversations, and I hope that you do because it's happening around you, I want you to be reassured that the person is coming to you because they could go off and do it on their own. I want you to recognize that there may be a conflict between the part of them that wants to live and this feeling like a change that needs to happen. Find out what that change is. And then see if you can listen deeply enough so that it makes sense. Like, okay. Typically, if you say, no, you shouldn't kill yourself, you're 19, you have your whole life ahead of you, you're just reinforcing that conflict that they already have inside of them. What they really are wanting is understanding. They really want that part of them that wants to die to be understood. Now we can talk about the boyfriend. What happened with the boyfriend? Now we can talk about dating. Oh, you had a bad experience with this guy who was the opposite of the boy that you fell in love with. Now we can talk about, why doesn't she have any opportunity to talk about her feelings? Oh, well, all of the adults around her never talk about their feelings. Well, maybe at that moment, I can start to introduce some ideas and some hope that actually you and I are able to talk about your feelings. I feel like we have a trusting. Do you feel like we have a trusting? It is common for people to fall in love, and then they start dating again, and they get clearer about what they need and what they're looking for, and then they find that in a partner. Now the person starts to have maybe some hope that some change can. Well, maybe what would it be like to activate your dating profile again? Now we have some empowerment. Now we have the person making a step towards change. So this is one of the greatest ironies, I think, of counseling, and maybe some of the counselors here is that ironically, the system asks us to zero in on the suicidal assessment and the means. And yeah, you can do that. And I've worked with people where I've said, yeah, I would be more comfortable. Would you feel safer if we got rid of those pills that you have stashed? Or are you in a home in the US? This is a big question. Are you in a home where there's a handgun? I mean, sometimes those conversations can be useful. But interestingly enough, when we start to actually talk about the person's life and we start to expand, that in itself can actually generate some hope. That actually I've got someone listening to me, I'm actually engaging with and then the suicidal feelings kind of stop having so much importance. There have been many times in counseling sessions where the first thing, the opening move is, yeah, my suicidal, I feel like I want to end my life. I'm like, okay, and now I could go down the chute of assessment and mandatory reporting and all the different, or I can just have a conversation, and then the person isn't focused on the powerlessness. They're actually focused more on their life. So those are some things to think about in terms of having conversations with people who are having suicidal feelings, and also exploring it. I mean, I have a dialogue with myself. I loved the conversation about being dissociative and having different parts. This is, I think, very interesting way of looking at it. Ask the part that wants to die. Well, what part does need to die? Well, the part of me that needs to die is the part of me that's stuck in this lousy job and has nowhere to go in my career. Okay, let's work on that. Actually, yeah, a lot of people, I find personal disclosures. Yeah, I was in a situation in my life where I was pretty stuck in my career. I wasn't able to move on. And I had kind of a late start with my training and my credentialing, but I was able to get through it. Okay, let's talk about that. Maybe some people talk about hope, but hope is not just like an icing on a cake. Hope is not just a sweet, fluffy thing. It's hope that some real change is going to happen. So you have to know what the real change is, not just sort of give somebody that hope is this thing with feathers that's just this nice, lovely thing. It's actually like a change can happen. Let's problem solve. I think that we sometimes do a disservice as counselors when we back off from practical things. Like sometimes our role is to be a coach, like, oh, well, it might be hard to find a partner if you're not dating. Let's look at your dating profile. Let's rewrite it. Well, do you have it? Let's do it right now. Read it to me. It can be often really empowering for the person to get into that mode of actually engaging with whatever the big change is. So, all right. Well, what I would love now, and I would love if there's a volunteer or more than one volunteer who would like to share something about your experience. It's not a role play. It's actually really sharing about your experience. We're going to be talking about a time in your life when when you felt like you wanted to end your life, you didn't want to keep going. And we're going to be doing this in front of the group. And if there's more people that volunteer, that's great. We'll flip a coin or spin a pen. And you know, I want people to be comfortable, but I don't want you to just stay in your comfort zone. It's okay to take. And it's often a wonderful opportunity for people to you know, share your story and also join me in the teaching, really, because it's an incredible thing. So it looks like we have 3 people, 4 people. Wow, wonderful. You see, my hypothesis was right. There is a great need to talk about suicidal feelings out in the world. And I just want to thank all of you. Maybe what we can do is let's see. I have 4 people. I want to thank you, Harmony, Natalie, Emma, and Andrea. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put you all, there's 4 of you. I'm going to put you all different places on a clock. I'm going to spin a pen here. It's not a rigged pen. It's a normal pen. There's no loaded dice here. I'm going to spin it and see which direction it goes in. Looks like I got 6 o'clock. So it looks like Emma has volunteered. So it looks like the pen chose Emma. So welcome, Emma. Now I'm going to ask Amber if you could help us. And if it's okay with you, Emma, we're going to spotlight everybody else, turn off your cameras, and everybody keep your muting. And then it'll just be Emma and myself spotlighted so that we can kind of be in the middle for our interview. I think is that the way to do it? Amber, I think how do we
Yeah,
set
that's absolutely fine. I'm just doing that for you now.
and then go into speaker view? Is that what I do, or how do I make that? All right. Gallery view. Oh, there we are. Okay. Okay. Hello, Emma.
Hi.
Thank you. Thank you for volunteering. And I just want to, you know, I just want to check in. Is it now that you've actually been selected and how are you feeling with volunteering? Because we have other people, you can step away, you can change your mind. How are you feeling about being up here and doing this?
No, I think you know, I'm a very private person. I've spent my life, you know, I think as a response to childhood trauma is to keep things to yourself, you know, keep the secrets. And you know, as I've gotten older, I realize how that really does impact you very negatively and can sort of contribute to deepening that sense of suicidal ideation, you know, feeling alone. I haven't got anyone who understands what I'm going through, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So stop me if I'm saying too much, please.
You're doing great. And yeah, it sounds like, you know, it's something that you're welcoming, the idea of sharing a bit about your experience, because you don't get a chance to do that, and you don't.
Yeah, and you know, we've touched on it so much in the last half an hour, 45 minutes, that you know, for those of us who have sadly been you know, you referred to that sort of sense of betrayal from a provider, be it therapeutic or psychiatric, and then you enter psychiatric hospital or whatever. I think if anything was to propel someone into suicide, it's that environment. But anyway,
100%. Yeah.
um,
Well, would it be all right if we, again, I don't want to invite you too far out of your comfort zone. So you tell us if we go too far, and I'll try and be aware as well. But would it be all right if you talk about a time in your life in the past when you had the suicidal times, and then we can kind of do a little bit of a conversation. And we won't have much time, unfortunately, but would that be okay?
Tell me to stop waffling when I'm waffling, because I do waffle a lot.
Okay, I'll try. I'm not sure I know what waffling means
Oh, it means just yittering on too much.
Oh, okay. Not so far. You're doing great so far, but I'll remember that I might need to interrupt you and keep you on track. Is
Yeah,
that what?
do.
Okay, great. Okay, so a time of your life in the past when you did feel that strong, or I mean, it could be maybe it wasn't strong, but a feeling of wanting to die. If you could just tell us about that a little bit.
To be honest, I've been diagnosed with two trauma disorders, and suicidal ideation has been a sort of feature of my life. I remember the first time I felt it, I was 8 years old, and telling my mother.
8 years old. 8
Yeah,
years old.
my
8
mother
years.
said, "Oh, don't be so ridiculous." Thanks, Mum.
You had feelings of wanting to die at 8 years old.
Mm.
Oh my God, Emma. Wow.
Anyhow,
Wow. Wow. Well, would it be, is it okay? Can I ask a little bit more about that? Because that's a really big thing that you just said when you were a child.
mm,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
there was a lot
was,
of abuse.
okay. If it's not okay to talk about it, but when you said that your mom's reaction was very dismissive, had she been dismissive to you like that before?
Yeah,
Was
that was my mother. She
that was your mother? That's how she was.
yeah,
So
and just sort of
I have I'm sorry, go ahead.
just invalidated experiences that she was aware of, and didn't sort of protect me,
Oh,
if you like.
wow.
And
Do you
that
know?
sort of continued into childhood. Adulthood, try again. You sort of repeat your past. What is it?
Yeah,
Repetition compulsion or whatever.
yeah.
And married an asshole, excuse my French. And
That'll do it.
then
But would it be okay? But is it okay? Because you said to jump in on you. So I want to
do.
just stay with that moment at 8 years old because I have a few more questions about that. So do you remember at 8, what was it that was going on? What was in there? Why did you say why did you say to your
I honestly don't know. And that's a feature of the dissociative disorder that I have. But actually for the very first time in my life, I actually did attempt, obviously failed abysmally because I'm still here.
Wow.
Last
Yeah.
November.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Okay. So there's a connection between, you said it's like a lifelong repetition. So there's a connection between what happened in November and what was going on at 8 years old. And you said you have dissociative and you don't know why, but I kind of can imagine, and you tell me what you think about this. You said you're in a family where your mom was doing this all the time of invalidating you. And is it possible that 8-year-old girl was kind of saying, look, I need this to change, or I need this to stop, or I need a different way in our family? Is that possible that that's what was?
Yeah, absolutely. She was aware that I was being sexually abused by a member in my family, and
Oh my God, okay. Your mom was aware of that.
yeah,
Wow.
she
Wow. Okay. Okay. So I think we have
so
we
as I
have,
said, I don't want to say too much.
yeah, that's why I'm kind of like slowing down. I'm kind of putting the brakes because you've said a lot. You've said a lot. And I just want to, because we don't have a lot of time, unfortunately. That's part of the way that the exercise works, if that's okay. But I just have one question. It's a little bit of like a therapist kind of question. I hope that's okay. Should I just ask you?
Go for it.
So what, so Emma today,
Mm.
as the woman that you are, courageous, coming forward, talking about your experience, wanting to break out of the silence, having learned so much,
Mm.
what might you say to that 8-year-old girl that you were?
I know you're feeling helpless. You're feeling helpless. And one would in that situation need an adult to come along and provide resources to pull
Yeah,
themselves out of that place of helplessness. But I couldn't give a solution to that 8-year-old,
yeah,
other than to have a strong, even if it's not a caregiver, but a strong adult role model who really senses what's going on, and the severity or the gravity of what's going on.
Beautiful. So what I'm hearing is that you would, that's beautiful. You would say, I know what you need, and I hear what you're going through. And what you need is a strong adult role model who can validate your experience and help you. You would be the mom that mom wasn't able to be for you.
Yeah, which
Wow.
he's God I am today to my little girl.
Thank God. Wow. Okay. I'm really touched by your courage and your willingness to be with us and share. And I wish there were more time. Is it okay if we kind of wrap? It's just that we
Of
just did a
course.
Is it
Yes.
okay if we wrap it up and then, okay, we'll go back to the group.
Okay.
So Amber, can you do your Zoom and make us back in grid land, or however that, everybody turn your cameras back on? Is that how it works? Or I'm not sure exactly how it works, but oh, now I
That's
see
all right. I'm just removing spotlights.
spotlights. Ah, the magic of
Yeah.
spotlights. Okay. Yeah. Emma, thank you. Let's see, are you with us? Where did you? And she,
I'm here.
yeah, I just want, okay, yeah. Feel free to turn your camera off or whatever you need to do. And I just want to, now that we're back off the spotlight, how was that for you? I just want to check in because you came forward, you talked about a lot of, I know that you share a lot. I'm sure you're not the only person who's been through childhood abuse like that in a relationship with
No.
mom.
And you know, I think, you know, if you're brought up in an environment where secrets must be kept and you invariably become mute to all intents and purposes,
You're
or
not
you know,
mutant.
put on this false positive mask to convince everyone that everything's tickety-boo, and it clearly isn't. So it's really liberating to finally say, you know what, this was shit. Oh, sorry, I've got a very potty mouth.
What it was shit. So I understand. Yeah, it's very it's liberating. It's liberating. There's something liberating.
It is.
Beautiful. I'm glad. Thank you. You give us a gift with your, and I mean, as a teacher, I'm like, you know, that's wonderful. Would it be all right? I don't want to focus too much on your experience, but I'd like to talk about myself and how I work and for the teaching. Is that all right if we go?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. I don't know, we're on Zoom, but I want to kind of give you a round of applause. Can everybody just give Emma like a round of applause? And that's really, wow. And I'm glad you're here with us. You've been through, it's not, applause with muted microphones isn't the same as it being in a live workshop. I get it, but still, I just want to thank you. I want to thank you. And yeah, so, okay, a lot of things. Emma's experience, as you can see, there's like this, it makes sense. It makes sense, even as horrifying as a little girl. It makes sense. And that's really what when she said what she said, I didn't really understand that. I could kind of think about, well, maybe her mom, but I thought maybe her mom only did that once in that moment, and mom was just, but no, actually this is a pattern. And then we discover that there's maybe something that this little girl is trying to get validated. It's a horror. And so really in that example, it really is a messenger. And it's the way I think of it, it's like, okay, you're in a house and you got this terrible noise, horrible, horrible noise. You can't work, you can't think. It's this horrible noise. And so you're going around the house and you finally find the source of the noise. And you get some pillows, you get a mattress, you stuff it over the source of the noise. Now you don't have to deal with the noise anymore. What if the noise is a smoke alarm? What if the noise, if we're just trying to silence or avoid or get away from, we miss the fact that the noise is a messenger pointing us to something. So when we start to work with suicidal feelings in ourselves and in other people, we can actually start to notice when they start to come in at the very early stage, like, oh, today I just wanted to give up. Oh, everything's just terrible today. oh, I just want to like escape. I want to, because I mean, let's be honest, the entire society thrives on substitutes for suicide. Netflix binging, alcohol, cannabis, all kinds of things that we do just to numb ourselves. If we can start to notice that little messenger quality as soon as it starts to show up, like what's going on? Like, and of course, this is where I think we need to move into a culture of listening. You know, we want to really solve mental health problems. We have to have a culture of listening to each other. People ask me like, Will, you know, what's your ideal improvement, innovation in the mental health system? How would you want to improve the mental health system? Is it the hearing voices approach? Is it open dialogue? Would you want to have harm reduction? What it's like, actually, I'd like to live in a society where we don't need a mental health system. I'm pretty much a mental health abolitionist because I think the mental health system steps in when something is wrong in the society, and we can kind of blame that mental health system, and we should, and pharma and the entire thing, and in the US, especially the for-profit approach. But ultimately, it's about, do we have healthy societies? Something is going on in a family where there's sexual abuse, and the child is trying to alert the mother, and the mother's not listening. Something's going on in that family, but I'm telling you, something's going on in that community. Something's going on in that society. Something is going on a larger level that's feeding into that. And people ask me, what is it, Will, that drove you into that state when you were suicidal? What is it that drove you? And a lot of it, you know, I didn't tell the story, and it's in my book that you can download and read, Outside Mental Health. But a lot of it is my family. There was emotional abuse in our family. There were boundary crossings. Both of my parents are very severe trauma survivors. But I don't blame my parents. I mean, I have had a lot of anger towards my parents. I validate that anger. I accept and understand that anger is not from me. It's a reaction to what happened to me. But I also understand that the society, you know, families have their parents. My parents had their parents, and there's war and the inability to recognize child sexual abuse, the economic situation, the fact that women, it's primarily women, are trapped in domestic violence situations because they can't afford rent for their own apartment. We would deal with so much domestic violence, we could reduce so much domestic violence if people could just afford an apartment on their own. I mean, the issues are larger. They're larger than just individual, family, even narrow communities. They're larger system issues that we don't have a society that's built around listening. Listening means time needs space. If you're working 60 hours a week, like we are in the United States and so many countries, I think the UK is included there. You know, what if we worked less? What if we had more time to spend listening to our neighbors? Maybe we could start to notice those messengers, those smoke alarms at the early stages. So I want to, it's a 2.5 hour training, okay? So I can give you a taste of the approach, and I think you can see in the demonstration that we did. But I just want to, I see we have a hand up. I just want to see if anybody has any thoughts that they want to share, especially after seeing the demonstration between Emma and myself. Maybe not so much on Emma's experience, but just how I was with her, and in general, if anybody has any comments or thoughts about that. And then I have a couple more things I want to present before we start to wrap up the training. So Agnieszka, and Natalie? Oh, we have a bunch of hands. So let's go with Agnieszka and one more. And Amber, I'll have you call on people, but go ahead, Agnieszka, yes.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Actually, I've got a slightly different question. If you could, because you said you're going to wrap it up and give some tips, because I work with youngsters. And my question was that there's an increase of them expressing lots of suicidal thoughts, and there is no hope for them. Like you mentioned, they feel hopeless. And how do you respond to that? Where would you start? Because they keep they just the reaction is they just want to, they not particularly they want to end their life, but they express those suicidal thoughts in any distress, in any situation.
It's a great question. So in general, I often, I trained in family approaches, so I often see, thank you for that question and thought. I often see young people as part of the larger system or network or family structure, right? It's very, very common that a young person will carry something that's going on with the whole family. So I try and work with the whole family. I try and work in the context. The thing about young people, it's very interesting about hopelessness in young people, because hopelessness in young people is often a way of saying, it's up to me. It's up to me. I have to make meaning myself. Often a young person will be in that space of hopelessness because it's right before they pick up the guitar and say, I'm going to go up on stage and start performing. Or it's right before they say, I'm going to go move to a different city and get a different job. That hopelessness can sometimes be a fuel for, okay, if everything is wide open, what are my dreams? What can I do with that kind of reckless, almost suicidal ability to take risks? I mean, young people, that's what we do when we're young. We just take lots of risks. We throw things out the window. We take giant leaps of extremely scary things that our parents say, no, 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 don't move across country and try and start an acting career in California. You'll never. Well, sometimes the hopelessness and the despair can be a starting point for that kind of like courage. And I think, I mean, it's not an easy question, of course, you're raising, but I think that the basic idea with young people is the same as we're talking about the deep listening. Young people present particular kinds of challenges for gaining trust and connecting. You may not be able to ask a young person, well, how are you feeling? But you might be able to say, well, what video game are you playing today? You play first-person shooters. Okay, do you play CS? What do you play? To have some kind of rapport in the young person's like, oh, you're watching, what movies are you into? Now, why is a young person really obsessed with the Star Wars saga? Why are they really interested in very violent military? You can get into a young person's world through the side door sometimes in a way, and then you can do actually quite meaningful work connecting with their feelings through that way. So I think basically, working with the family in the context or the institutional context or the community context, if we're talking about young people that maybe don't have their parents, they're orphans or in foster care or something like that. And then basically the same ideas that we're working with here. So I hope that's helpful. I have a list of lots of different approaches that I want to present, but let's go with one more comment, especially if it's a comment that's related to how you saw me working with Emma. So
Natalie has their hand up. I don't know if Natalie's observation or question is related to that.
Yeah,
it wasn't really. It was more in regards to can I like, elaborate a little bit? Or did you want someone specifically to comment on what you just did?
If you can make it really concise, is it possible? Because I'm also a mindful
Yeah,
of
I
the
think
time.
so. I think that from like previous experience of my daughter being suicidal, making a number of attempts on her life, and having my own suicidal feelings over that, I think that perhaps I've over normalized the idea that it's normal for someone to experience suicidal thoughts when they feel overwhelmed. So much so that when I was talking to one of my best friends leading up to Christmas, and she was sending messages and she was laughing and joking, and then she took her own life. And so I think that it's trying to make sense of it as a therapist, how to find some sort of balance. I think that I don't know if that, I feel like I'm trying to rush my question in order to sort of get my point across, but I don't know if that's making sense to you. So
You're making perfect sense. Yeah, I know exactly what I mean, the point about normalizing it isn't to neglect it. the point about normalizing it is to bring down the fear and say, okay, suicidal feelings, tell me more about what the situation is, because there may be something going on that. But absolutely, I mean, it's a messenger. It's like an alarm. It can be. And like I've said, I mean, sometimes it's about a change that needs to take place, like getting out of an abusive situation or making a change with your life, or in the example that I gave with my life, a conflict with my partner that I wasn't addressing. Sometimes it's just as simple as having an interview and saying, oh, okay, the suicidal feelings started on a specific date. What happened on that date? Oh, that's the date you started taking the prednisone. Okay, so suicidal feelings are a side effect of prednisone. Maybe it really is just as simple as calling up your doctor and getting off this. So there's all kinds of different possibilities for sure.
I
So
totally
yeah, so
understand.
thank
I think it's about tolerating that the responsibility as a therapist, I think, is probably sort of.
It's a good way of saying it. Yeah, thank you. I tolerate. I try not to go, like we mentioned at the beginning, like you have a fear response. A lot of times the fear response is very closely related to a control and fix it kind of mentality. Time gets very narrowed, like immediate, and tolerating that. And that's to me. So what is often helpful. So thank you, Natalie, for that. So let's we have a few more minutes. I know, I mean, I'm absolutely thrilled and encouraged that there's so much interest in questions and conversations. And I just find ways to continue these conversations, I think is really crucial. Because like I said, we can reduce the fear. Now we have an ability to open up what has been a really taboo topic. And I think that our society has suffered by making it taboo and shutting it off from conversation. So I want to quickly go over a handout that I have that is in your, it's in your, let's see, it's in your web page, and it's different approaches to living with suicidal feelings. And some of the things I think, are you able to all see this? Yeah? Okay. Okay, so there's a lot, and the reason I made a lot is because I want you to feel resourced. I came up with 43 different ways of responding. 43 is a nice number. So some of them I think you've seen demonstrated in today's training. Some of them are things for you to think about and maybe explore on your own. You can also email me. There's a couple of handouts that we didn't get to in the collection of resources that elaborate some of these things. So, and again, I forget who it was, but who talked about there being a menu or a different range of possibilities, because I think that's really what a less or non-fearful approach achieves, is curiosity to different possibilities. So this is just a list of some things that I've noticed in myself that I find often useful. Everybody's different. So some of the attitudes are that I can only do my best. There's limits that I can't go beyond. I know my role. People may want a 10-hour session. I can't provide that, and that's okay. I'm not the cause of someone being saved. I've had people come to me and say, Will, you know, the work that we did together, thank you, thank you, thank you. You saved my life. Thank you. I appreciate the gratitude. I don't know that that's true. Maybe it was just time. Maybe it was encountering a flower like I did on the bridge. I don't ever know for sure. Remember what we said, you cannot predict suicide, which means that you can't predict not suicide, right? So I don't know that I saved someone. So I really get careful about backing off from that, because then I don't feel so like a rescuer. Because the flip side of it is I'm not to blame of someone not being saved. And if things go wrong or someone gets hurt or some tragedy happens, it is important for everyone to scrutinize, what could I do better? What could I do better? What could I learn from this situation? What are some possibilities I didn't look at? But that's different than blaming yourself and being consumed with guilt. Guilt is part of the grieving process, but it's for the grieving process. It's not for how do we make ourselves a better therapist by blaming ourselves that I could have saved this person and I didn't. No one knows what causes someone to be saved. I'm free to help, and I'm also free to step back. We could do a week-long training on boundaries and how to navigate them with compassion and firmness, but you have to have boundaries. Everybody has to figure out their own. It's very common for people to burn out when people are in crisis. I have certain tools that I use, like, yes, it's okay to text me anytime, but I'm not always going to respond. I'm not always available to respond. Maybe you'll text me, you won't hear back, and then we talk about it in a session. So I respond to my fear. I'm afraid that I'm getting overwhelmed. Listen to that. Address it. Take care of myself first. It's one of the reasons that we study fear in the beginning of this training, because I want to come in with an open, caring, grounded, accepting place. I really want to have the freedom to say, no, now is not the time. I'm not available as a supporter. I'm just not available. And if it becomes a problem that the person continues to need me, I need to problem solve that. I'm connected with my body, my ancestors, my goodness. Different ways of listening. Asking for consent to talk. You notice that I asked permission. I even repeatedly asked with Emma. Space, time, and focus. I reminded Emma that we're very limited. I reminded the limitation on the space. I use lots of silence, but with Emma, she said, don't let me prattle on. Wonderful. It's fabulous when you're a counselor or your helper or friend and someone tells you exactly how to work with you. Will, interrupt me to keep me on track. Thank you. That's so helpful. Generally speaking, a lot of silence, but you want to listen to the person and listen to them when they say, hey. So be a sounding board, suspend judgment, avoid advice. Listening really is helpful. And in the example for Emma, I mean, it was the core of what she was describing, that no one was listening. Curiosity, asked open-ended questions. I'm curious. I didn't know that her mother was like this repeatedly. It was probable, but I asked that. I try and notice where I get stuck in the narrow, you're suicidal, what's going on? Tell me about the buildup. One thing that I often do is clinical language is often fear-based language, and it can really narrow us into assessment and intervention. I want to move out of that to the rich story. Someone says, Will, I had a bipolar episode. I'm not going to argue with them about the validity of diagnosis, but I'm going to say something like, what kind of bipolar episode? How did you know you were in a bipolar? Tell me what was going on. What was the buildup? So moving from clinical language to the story. Attention to body and emotions. We talked about ask with curiosity to the point that it makes sense to you as a listener. So a lot of these are really very common sense, but we often have to remind ourselves of common sense. And then afterwards, this is really true as counselors and friends and family, what was helpful to you? Because typically ask the person that you're supporting, what was helpful to you? Because as a helper, you think that, oh, your psychoanalytic training is all this, or your compassion or your faith is they know what's helpful to them. You have a lot of assumptions about what's helpful to them. Oh, it was great when you told me all that advice. Oh, this person feels helped by advice. Okay, they don't feel bossed around or like I'm making assumptions or I'm not listening to them. They actually feel helped by advice. I'm going to follow that. So I'm going through quickly, but you have this. So I'm not going to be able to touch on each one, but patience, not panicking, connecting with my own experience, naming the conflict. Well, a part of you wants to die, but a part of you doesn't. Let's find out about the part of you that doesn't. What change would you want? What is something that you would want different in your life? Why do you feel powerless? Sometimes people feel powerless just because they have no one to validate or listen. Inner critic work, there's a handout about inner critic. Often there's someone beating up on them internally, almost like a voice that we have internally. Help the person to stand up to that. But don't just do that without knowing why the person wants to end their life, because that feeling may be a messenger. There may be something you don't want to just shut down. I often get personal and I get human. I would personally be hurt. Sometimes the distance with the person that you're working with is actually part of the problem. They need to feel some kind of connection. I might say a few things to them that I think are important. Like people will say, well, I want to get rid of this pain by ending my life. Well, actually, no. If you end your life, you're not going to ever feel no pain, because being dead, you don't feel. You will only have the pain that you've had. You're ending the story halfway through. You don't find out what the next chapter is. Or that a lot of people who do attempt suicide end up disfigured or wounded or paralyzed or brain injured. It's actually very difficult to kill yourself. You may think that height, people have survived from the Golden Gate Bridge. People have survived gunshot wounds, or even to the head, or gunshot, or taking a lot of pills. So anyway, there's a lot of different things. I want to make sure that we have a little bit of time for any closing questions or comments. So that list is in your drive of resources, and I hope that it's helpful. Send me an email if you have questions about it. And I guess what I'd like to do now is I want to remind people that there's an evaluation form for the training. And I want to thank everybody for being here. Joe or Amber, can you put the evaluation form link? Well, it'll also be in the follow-up email, but if you want to do that right after the training, I really appreciate that. But I want to just open it up. We have a few more minutes. People we haven't heard from yet. Amber, if you could call on somebody that maybe we haven't heard from, who would like to just share your thoughts about the training as a whole, any specific questions that you have, any comments, any thoughts, anything you want to share. Amber, do you want to maybe call on somebody?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I have popped the evaluation link in the chat for anybody that wants it now, but as Will said, we will be sending it out with the other information that you have.
Amber, if there's anything in the chat, any questions, any quick questions I could address that people put in the chat that they didn't want to.
I'll have another look.
Okay.
I believe if anybody hasn't had an answered question in the chat, can you just repeat it now? Because there's obviously quite a lot in the chat, but I will have a look and go through for you. But Harmony came in first with their hand up, and then Sinead, and then we've got Michael and Anthony.
Oh my, we've got 5 minutes, so we're gonna make it really,
that's fine.
really
So we've got
short.
Harmony first.
Oh, it's speed training, so go for it.
Okay. So one of the questions that I have, even just when I'm working with client or with a therapist, because I struggle with suicidal feelings, is that a lot of them are not operating from an anti-oppressive framework. So when that powerlessness comes up with the suicidal feelings, and like you've talked about, like how can you harness that and then like act on change. But I think when someone in my situation is actually being systemically oppressed and those options for change are being controlled from outside sources,
Gotcha, yeah.
Like this is, I'm having a challenge working with my own suicidal
feelings,
like finding a light out of a system that's trapped me in it.
Yeah, right. Thank you so much, Harmony. So there's a tremendous literature of political activists and social change movement organizers responding to suicide and struggling with suicide and suicidal feelings as part of there's a wonderful book by Judith Herman called Trauma and Recovery that I would recommend. And I mean, I think that you're absolutely right. You know exactly why that therapist is not the right therapist for you. I would say be persistent in changing therapists. Often groups are the way to go. The women's movement addressed trauma not as a clinical issue, but as a social change issue. We need to remember the pioneering role that feminist women played in bringing these issues forward, including suicidal feelings and trauma. So 100%, 100%. I have a link in the list of resources to a talk I gave at the World Hearing Voices Congress that I think you may find interesting, which is about suicidal feelings and social justice and social change. So thank you for bringing that in. Okay, let's keep going. One more. Who's next?
Sinead.
Sinead, real quick.
Sorry. How do you balance too, person's body, their right to choose, that they can, that they can enjoy life when they want to as well?
How do you balance that?
Because so much is of like trying to keep someone alive, even in a caring therapeutic way, but it is person's body to choose.
Right. It's a great, so you'll notice that we haven't really talked about the counselor's job to stop suicide. I don't think it's actually necessarily our job. I think it's necessary for us to notice that there's a conflict and help the person work through the conflict, because if they wanted to do it, they would do it. They don't need us. They're not in the counseling. They're not disclosing to a friend. They're not disclosing to a partner or a family member. So the right to choice is, I personally feel that, there are situations where if someone is 100% like, look, I have a terminal illness, I'm at the end of my life, then yeah, it's more humane for that person to be able to have a choice. I say that I don't think that you meet that qualification. I think you're in a conflict. Let's explore the conflict. And then the person is going to use that on their own to make their own choice about that. I hope that's a helpful response. I want to try and get one more question or comment before we wrap up. Let's see, Amber, if you want to point somebody else.
We have Michael, and I was wondering whether for anybody that has any other questions, Will, you did say that we could ask them directly to you via your website. So I was just going to pop that in the chat. Okay, Anthony, sorry. So Michael, did you want to ask your question?
Quick, because I want to attend to the trauma-informed principle of leaving on time, because people have other commitments. So real quick, and we'll do 1 minute.
Sure. Nice to see you again, Will. So I just wanted to say I used to work in rail mass transit, and people used to ask operators of such systems are concerned about people leaping in front of trains, and they would ask me what's the solution to that, and I'd say platform doors, like physical barriers, and it'll be 60 million a platform edge, and they'd say, well, we don't really want to spend that, and I'm like, okay, so the economic cost is too high to say, why, just so we're clear. And they'd say, yeah. So what else can we do? How about video cameras? And I said, what would you want to do with those? And they would say, well, like, is there behaviors we can look at? Like if someone's hanging around the platform edge and they're too close to the edge, then maybe we can do something.
Real short, Mike.
Yeah. So in any case, they're not concerned about helping people. They're just concerned about not having newspaper articles about people ending their lives in front of trains. And so now what they have done is they have made cameras that can detect people who are doing things they don't like, so they can be arrested and taken away to the hospital, and they're no more likely to be able to predict suicidality either. So I told them they're wasting their time. So I have stopped consulting in this area. So that's where I'm at today.
Thank you so much for that interesting perspective. And that's really useful, because what you said is that actually the interest isn't in really responding to suicidal feelings. It's pushing the problem away so that the person kills themselves, but not on the train platform. They do it and that's unfortunately, in California, we've had some legislation passed, which is the same mentality. The problem is not people are suffering. The problem is that people are suffering in front of us. We need to get them away. And it's a symptom of the larger problem of our mental health system that's not dealing with the root causes. So that's a wonderful, it's a tragic thing to think about, but it's actually I think it's a very useful way to end the training, because I want us to think about social change, and that we want to change this hypocritical taboo, and we want to really address suicidal feelings. I hope we have some sense of a direction that we need to go from this training. So thank you very much, everybody. I really appreciate it. A big thank you to Emma and to everybody who spoke up and shared. And also thank you to everybody who's here, even if you didn't speak up. Thank you for being part of it. And I want to especially thank Joe and Amber for the invitation to be part of this. Thank you so much.